And as I was coming up down near Marlin, this is when it was just a little two-lane road with a deep bar ditch on either side. I was headed north, and coming south was a big dually pickup hauling a trailer with a big smoker on back. I had a car in front of me, a car behind me, so I couldn't really maneuver much. And I looked up, and on that trailer, on the smoker trailer, a wheel turned loose and came bounding towards me, not just rolling, but bouncing. And I was very fortunate that it caught me when it was down rather than coming through my windshield. But it bashed in the front left passenger side and fender, and I limped over to the side of the road, and I couldn't even find that tire. I was looking for it for evidence, but evidently when I hit it, it went shooting way off somewhere into some weeds, and I never found it. I had to get out of the car, shimmied over to the passenger side so I could get out, come over and pull the fender out where it was cutting into my tire, and thinking, you know, this is not a real good omen for someone going on their first real job interview. I said, boy, this is not a great start. But I said, I'll just drive on into Fort Worth and see how it goes. And at that point, I walked into the station on Broadcast Hill, and there I met Harold Taft for the very first time. And Harold was, you know, a real military bearing and very straightforward. Yes, sir. No, sir. You know, he didn't take vacations. He went on leave. And you have to ask him a question, it was affirmative or negative, not yes or no. So that's the kind of guy Harold was. And I went in, and you know, I was kind of quaking in my boots a little bit, and he said that he really had all the information he needed on me. He had a copy of my transcript from college, and said, you know, you obviously know your stuff. You did very well in school. What we need to see is you in front of the camera. So without any further ado, he marched me right into the studio. They had left, this was a Saturday morning, they had left all the maps up from his 10 o'clock show that night, the night before. And so I walk out, sit on the anchor desk, and here's this big camera in front of me, and off to the side, the paper weather maps on the wall. And the camera comes on, I introduce myself. Hello, I'm David Finfrock. Let's take a look at the Texas map. And I push the chair back, not gauging very carefully how far it was to the drop off on that raised platform, and my chair starts tilting back and falling off the edge. Now, fortunately, at this point, they had cut away to the map, so when you looked at it, you didn't see me actually falling, but you could hear this tremendous crash in the background. I managed to scramble to my feet as the chair was going over, so I at least didn't fall with it. But at that point, took another deep breath, walked over, discussed the Texas map, the U.S. map, the forecast, came back. One of the floor crew, thankfully, had put my chair back up. I sat down and said goodbye, and figured, wow, this is the shortest TV career in history. I'll redouble my efforts when I get back to school this afternoon. But I was amazed when about a month later, I got another phone call from Harold Taft. And he called and offered me the job. I couldn't believe it. I thought this was a catastrophe. But he told me a year or so later, I asked him why he chose me over some of the others. And he said the fact that that happened at my interview, and I didn't stop down and say, oh, can we start over? I kept going. And he said he figured if I could do that on my interview, I'd be able to handle whatever came up on live TV. So it was really a blessing in disguise. What seemed like a catastrophe was the one thing that put me above other equally qualified candidates. So you never really know where good news is going to come from. Now, I started December 22nd of 1975. That was the first day I worked at Broadcast Hill at the Channel 5 studio. And for my first week or 10 days, I would go in and draw maps and learn how to do all of that, make the forecast, but I wasn't on the air yet. And this was when Ron Godby was doing the weather in the mornings. And then Harold Taft would come in at noon and do the weather and then prepare for his evening shift. But one day, after I'd been there about 10 days or so, this was sometime in the first week of January, I'm sitting there uh, finishing the maps and sitting back, getting ready to watch Harold give the weather forecast. And he turns to me and says, "David, why don't you do it today?" So I had like 2 minutes warning as we went into the commercial break before weather that I was going to be making my inaugural debut on TV. And honestly, that's the best thing he could have done for me. If he had told me, "Tomorrow you're going on the air for the first time," I would have had a restless night, had trouble sleeping, worried about what am I going to do? What am I going to say? Here, I didn't have time to worry. I just got out there and it was like my interview. I did the weather and went on. So, yeah, it's really strange how things work out sometime. Now, there have been a lot of changes since then. You know, I mentioned the paper maps. We drew these big paper maps with chalk and marks a lot and hand-colored maps. And we would go in, rip the numbers off the teletype and come in and read those and then mark the temperatures after the newscast had already started, because we didn't want hour-old temperatures. We would draw on the new ones, and and at the end of that show, you'd rip that map down and draw an entire new one for the next hour. So that's the way things started out. But then we got into the computer age in the 80s, and things have really changed since then. I think Harold wasn't real excited about working with computers. That was not his forte. He was an excellent forecaster and a great boss, but not real computer savvy. And so he recognized that this was the way to go. Even though it's not something he was comfortable with, he knew this was the future. And so Harold came to me, and we worked together on our first numbers of programs and got the graphics done, and things have just accelerated over the years. I think the one thing that Harold would be most surprised at this point is that now you can see radar on a phone from your pocket. That would blow his mind. Harold, of course, died back in 1991, and that was before anything about smartphones or computers of internet type activity. So things have really changed over the years. And over all those years, I've seen lots of storms. The worst ones, oh, I still think Mayfest hailstorm, 1995, May 5th, 95. That's the one that stands out in my memory above all others. That one came right over our studio, as a matter of fact, after pounding all the people at Mayfest with softball-sized hail. We got the same thing at our studio. Every car in our parking lot, including mine that was 6 weeks old, it just got pummeled by softball-sized hail. Windows were bashed out on the studio. It was really a catastrophe dollar-wise in Fort Worth. And then as that storm moved into Dallas, it slowed down and dumped 5 inches of rain in 1 hour. That's the worst flash flooding we have had in all of my years on the air, which now is up to 44 years and counting. And that flooding cost 20 lives that night in Dallas. That's the greatest number of fatalities we've had from weather here, even to this date. So that definitely stands out. Other things, the March 28th, 2000 tornado in downtown Fort Worth. That one, of course, came right through the downtown area, and we had our live camera up downtown, and you could see the clouds spinning around as the tornado moved right through. And the problem is our studio at that time was about 3.5 miles east of downtown Fort Worth, and this tornado was moving through downtown heading east. So after another minute or two, I said, all right, I've got to take a break. I'm going to toss it over to Jane and Mike. And I ran out onto the front porch because I needed to see if that tornado was still there and coming for our studio. I was going to have to send everybody down to the basement. Fortunately, I could still see some swirling up in the clouds, There was still definite rotation, but no funnel at that point. So I was able to run back inside and continue the coverage. The other big tornado event that stands out was when we had twin tornado emergencies. This was the worst possible situation. You had a big tornado coming up into southern Dallas County, and simultaneously a big tornado coming up out of Johnson County into Arlington. So both Tarrant County and Dallas County were under tornado emergencies. And you just don't see tornado emergencies very often. And when you do, you certainly don't expect two different counties at the same time, the two most populous counties in North Texas. That was the most difficult day for me to cover, because I would be focused in on this tornado coming up towards the Lancaster area in southern Dallas County, and say, we got a dangerous tornado moving in, take cover. You got to cut away now, because we have to talk about the one just as dangerous coming into Arlington. And so that, it was just mind-boggling. It was hard to leave one tornado and go to the other one. But we had to do that. And that's the day, if you recall, when we had those pictures of all the tractor trailers flying through the air when the tornado hit that depot area just off I-20 in southern Dallas County. So there's been a lot of different storms and different kinds of storms, ice and snow also. I remember one particular broadcast. This was after Harold had already passed. I was working with Scott Chesner, and we were looking at a big batch of snow out towards Abilene and San Angelo. It was coming down good, and it was moving east along I-20 towards the Dallas-Fort Worth area. National Weather Service forecast snow. All of the other TV stations went along, forecast snow. Scott and I were looking at the 850 millibar chart, what happens up around 5,000 feet off the ground, and we could see this nose of warm air wrapping around coming up into Dallas-Fort Worth. And we looked at that and said, we think that snow's all going to turn to rain before it gets here. And so I said that on my newscast at 5 o'clock. And right after the news ended, our news director came running in, and she said, David, I trust you, but everyone else is forecasting snow. She was really concerned. And Scott and I explained to her what we had seen, and sure enough, when it got to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, nothing but a cold rain. So I felt pretty good about that. That's where it helps having a real meteorologist doing the forecast as opposed to just a weathercaster.